Living with 3 best friends sounded like a dream, until rent day came around and our apartment turned into a battleground. I sat on the couch, arms crossed, while Ryan Darcy, our self-proclaimed social butterfly, paced in front of me. Leo Bennett, the most responsible one among us, leaned against the kitchen counter with a judgmental stare. And Eason Knight? He was sprawled on the floor, tossing a stress ball in the air like he had nothing better to do. "So, let me get this straight," Ryan said, narrowing his eyes at me. "You're saying you'll cover our rent for an entire year if we help you get a boyfriend?" I nodded. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying." Eason let out a low whistle. "Damn. Desperate times, huh?" I scowled. "I'm not desperate. I just need a little assistance." Ryan smirked. "Buddy, when your dating life is as dry as the Sahara, that's called desperation." Leo sighed. "Colin, are you sure about this? Finding a boyfriend isn't something you can just outsource." I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. "Look, I'm tired of being single, but I suck at dating. Every time I try, it ends in disaster. You guys are all in relationships or serial flirts." I shot a look at Ryan, who winked. "So clearly, you know something I don't." Ryan grinned. "Flattery will get you everywhere." Eason sat up, grinning like the Cheshire Cat. "And what exactly do we get out of this little deal, other than the sheer joy of watching you crash and burn?" I rolled my eyes. "I just said, free rent. For a year." Leo frowned. "That's an insane offer. Do you know how much money that is?" Ryan's voice went an octave higher. "Colin, you're basically bribing us." "It's not a bribe," I muttered. "It's an investment in my love life." Eason tilted his head. "And if we actually succeed, what then?" I hesitated. "Then, congratulations. You've done the impossible." Ryan and Leo exchanged glances. Eason, however, was watching me with that unreadable expression of his, one I'd long since learned to be wary of. "All right," Ryan finally said, rubbing his hands together. "We accept." Leo groaned. "We do." Ryan ignored him. "Step 1. Make Colin dateable." "Excuse me," I scoffed. "I am dateable." Eason chuckled. "Sure, buddy." I crossed my arms. "What's wrong with me?" Ryan tapped his chin. "Where do I begin? You're awkward, you overthink things, and your flirting skills are non-existent." Leo nodded. "And you dress like a dad." Eason smirked. "A hot dad, though." I blinked at him. "That sounded like a compliment?" Eason grinned. "Take it however you want." I felt my face heat up but quickly shook it off. "Fine, whatever. What's next?" Ryan clapped his hands. "Boys, we have a project. Let's get our boy Colin a boyfriend." Eason stretched, standing up. "This is going to be fun." I had a sinking feeling that fun for Eason meant humiliation for me. And just like that, my fate was sealed. The next morning, I regretted everything. I woke up to Ryan and Leo standing over my bed like 2 demons sent to torment me. Eason was leaning against the doorway, smirking. "Rise and shine, lover boy," Ryan chirped, yanking my blanket off me. I groaned, burying my face in my pillow. "What the hell?" "Step 1 of our master plan. Makeover," Leo announced, arms crossed like he was about to give a TED Talk on my failures. I blinked blearily. "Makeover." Eason nodded, his smirk growing. "New wardrobe, new haircut, new everything." I sat up slowly, rubbing my face. "Thanks for the confidence boost." "Think of it as tough love," Ryan said, unbothered. "Now get dressed. We're going shopping." I sighed. "Do I have a choice?" Ryan grinned. "Not if you want that boyfriend." Half an hour later, I found myself being dragged through the trendiest mall in the city. Ryan was in his element, flitting between clothing racks like a possessed fashionista. Leo played the role of the responsible consultant, vetoing Ryan's more ridiculous choices. Eason, he just followed along, arms crossed, watching me suffer with barely concealed amusement. "I don't get it," I muttered as Ryan shoved a pile of clothes into my arms. "What's wrong with how I dress now?" Ryan gave me a look. Colin, I love you, but you dress like a divorced dad who only shops during sales. Leo nodded. It's time for an upgrade. Eason finally spoke, tilting his head as he looked me up and down. You don't have to change everything, but a little effort wouldn't hurt. Something about the way he said it made my stomach flip. Cleared my throat. Fine. Whatever. Let's just get this over with. They shoved me into the fitting room with a pile of clothes. The first outfit was a disaster. Ryan had given me a neon green sweater that made me look like a traffic sign. The second outfit was too tight in all the wrong places. The third one, however, I stepped out wearing a fitted black button-up and dark jeans. Ryan's eyes lit up. Now we're talking. Leo nodded in approval. See? A little tailoring makes a big difference. Eason's gaze lingered on me a second too long before he smirked. Not bad. You almost look like someone I'd date. My face burned. That's not. I mean. Ryan clapped his hands. All right, next step. Confidence training. I groaned. That sounds ominous. Oh, it is, Ryan said cheerfully. Eason, you're up. I frowned. What? Eason stretched lazily. You need flirting lessons, Hiddleston. And lucky for you, I'm an expert. I stared at him. No way. Absolutely not. Eason just grinned. Scared. That's how I ended up sitting across from Eason in a busy cafe trying and failing to flirt. Try again, Eason instructed, sipping his coffee. Pretend I'm someone you're interested in. Say something smooth. I exhaled. Hey, you have nice eyebrows. Ryan face-bombed. Leo sighed. Eason, to his credit, only laughed. Wow, I feel so flattered. I groaned. This is impossible. Eason leaned forward, voice dropping just slightly. Flirting isn't about rehearsed lines, Colin. It's about confidence. You don't need to be someone else. Just be bold. My breath hitched. Was it my imagination? Or was he actually flirting with me? Ryan cleared his throat. Okay, let's not make this weird. Eason leaned back, smirking. Too late. I wasn't sure if I had learned anything useful that day, but one thing was clear. This bet was going to be way harder than I thought. You're joking? I said flatly, staring at Ryan like he'd lost his mind. He wasn't joking. Colin, listen. Ryan began, hands gesturing wildly. Before your date, you need to be ready. You know, physically, emotionally. I narrowed my eyes. Ryan, where are you going with this? Ryan grinned, throwing an arm around my shoulder. You need practice. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Ryan, no. Ryan ignored me, turning to Eason, who was lounging on my couch like he lived there. You're in, right? Eason smirked, eyes gleaming with amusement. For what exactly? Ryan clapped his hands together. Colin needs a practice kiss before his date. You should do it. I nearly choked. Excuse me? Eason tilted his head, considering it far too seriously. Interesting proposition. I threw my hands up. Why are we even entertaining this idea? Ryan beamed. Because first kisses set the tone. And you, my friend, need to make an impression. I turned to Eason. You don't have to. I'll do it. Eason interrupted, his smirk deepening. Think of it as a friendly favor. I stared at him. You're messing with me. Eason shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. 20 minutes later, I found myself standing in my living room, heart pounding as Eason took a step closer. Ryan had somehow managed to disappear, leaving us alone in this absurd situation. You're really taking this seriously? I asked, trying to sound unaffected. Eason's expression was unreadable. Are you? I swallowed hard. This was just practice. No big deal. Just a kiss with my best friend. Eason placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch surprisingly steady. Relax. I am relaxed. I lied. He chuckled, his breath warm against my skin. You're stiff as a board, Colin. I opened my mouth to argue, but then his lips brushed against mine. It was supposed to be quick, just a light, teasing peck. But the moment our lips touched, something shifted. The teasing atmosphere vanished. The warmth of his lips, the gentle pressure, It sent a jolt through me. My breath hitched as his fingers lingered at my jawline. Barely there, but enough to make my skin tingle. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Instead, my hands found their way to his waist, steadying myself. Eason made a quiet sound, one I didn't recognize, before he deepened the kiss just slightly, enough to make my stomach flip. The world blurred for a moment, everything narrowing down to this. His lips on mine, the scent of his cologne, the way his fingers curled against my shirt like he wasn't ready to let go. Then, just as suddenly as it started, he pulled away. We stood there, staring at each other, breathing unevenly. Eason was the first to break the silence. Well, his voice was lower than usual. That was something. I had no words. My brain was still catching up to what had just happened. Eason smirked, but it wasn't as playful as before. I'd say you're more than ready for your date. I nodded dumbly, though I wasn't sure if I agreed. Because if that was just practice, then why did it feel so damn real? I had been dreaming about this moment for months. Finally getting a date with Zane Rivera. He was exactly my type. Charming, well-dressed, and confident without being arrogant. Everything about him was objectively perfect. So why the hell was I sitting across from him in this fancy restaurant, completely unable to focus? Colin. Zane tilted his head, offering me a patient smile. You okay? Yeah. Totally fine. I snapped out of my daze, realizing I had been absent-mindedly swirling the ice cubes in my water glass for the past 5 minutes. Zane chuckled, resting his chin on his hand. You seem a little distracted. Oh, just a long day. I forced a smile, hoping it was convincing. The truth? My brain had been hijacked by the memory of Eason's lips on mine. It had been 2 days since our so-called practice kiss, and I still hadn't fully recovered. The worst part? Eason had acted completely normal afterward, like it hadn't affected him at all. Meanwhile, I had spent the past 48 hours replaying it in my head like some kind of deranged romantic lead in a coming-of-age drama. Zane, blissfully unaware of my inner crisis, took a sip of his wine. So, tell me more about yourself. Ryan mentioned you're a writer. What? My brain short-circuited. Ryan had told him that? Zane laughed. Yeah, he said you write. What was it again? Reviews. Oh, right. Food reviews. Not romance novels. Yeah. Mostly for fun, though. Just something I do in my free time. Well, I'd love to read something you've written, Zane said smoothly, flashing me a warm smile. I should have been flattered. This was the part where I was supposed to blush, flirt back, maybe even imagine a second date. Instead, my gaze drifted over Zane's shoulder, because behind him, through the restaurant's glass window, was Eason, sitting in a booth, staring directly at me. My stomach dropped. He wasn't alone. Ryan was with him. Sipping on a milkshake like this was the most entertaining thing he'd ever witnessed. I narrowed my eyes, silently asking, "What the hell are you two doing here?" Ryan wiggled his eyebrows. Eason, he just smirked and raised his glass in a silent toast. I nearly knocked over my drink. Colin. Zane's voice pulled me back. You okay? Why, yeah. Just, I grabbed my fork in a panic and somehow managed to send a piece of my bread roll flying off the plate. Zane blinked as the rogue piece of bread bounced off his shoulder and landed in his lap. Oh my God! I gasped, mortified. I am so sorry. Zane picked up the bread, inspecting it with amusement. No worries. Was that a planned attack? I groaned. I wish I could say yes. Behind him, I caught Eason snorting into his drink, and Ryan full-on cackling. I was going to kill them both. Zane, being the saint that he was, laughed it off. Relax, it's just bread. He leaned in slightly. If you're nervous, don't be. I don't bite. I swallowed. He was being incredibly sweet. He was charming. He was not Eason, and I hated that the thought even crossed my mind. So, Zane continued, unfazed, what's your ideal date? I opened my mouth to answer, only for my knife to somehow slip off the edge of the table, land on my lap, and leave a very visible streak of sauce on my pants. Kill me. Just kill me now. Zane's lips twitched. That bad, huh? I buried my face in my hands. I swear I am not usually this much of a disaster. Hey, he said gently. It's okay. First dates can be nerve-wracking. I peeked at him through my fingers. He really was a great guy. Maybe, if I hadn't spent the entire time thinking about someone else, this could have actually worked. But the truth was glaringly obvious now. Zane wasn't the problem. The problem was that my heart was somewhere else. Sitting at a booth near the window, smirking at my misfortune like the smug bastard he was. I slammed the door behind me, tossing my jacket onto the couch with a frustrated sigh. My date with Zane had been a disaster. Awkward silences, spilled drinks, and me tripping over absolutely nothing on my way back from the restroom. Eason, who had followed me inside, leaned against the counter with a smirk. So, should I ask how it went? Or is the answer already written all over your face? I groaned, sinking onto the couch. It was terrible. Eason chuckled and flopped down next to me, stretching his legs out. To be fair, I don't think I've ever seen you that nervous before. Not even during exams. I shot him a glare. You were spying. Observing, he corrected, completely unapologetic. I wanted to make sure you didn't, I don't know, faint from sheer panic. I groaned again and covered my face with a pillow. I don't get it. I've liked Zane for months. This should have been great. But instead, I was a fumbling mess. Eason was quiet for a moment before nudging me. You ever think that maybe you built him up too much in your head? I frowned and lowered the pillow. What do you mean? He shrugged. Sometimes we get so caught up in wanting something that we don't stop to consider if we actually like it. Maybe Zane was just an idea in your head, not someone you really connect with. I thought about it for a second. I don't know. I mean, he's nice, he's good looking, and I've had a crush on him forever. But did you feel comfortable? Eason asked, tilting his head. Did you feel like you could be yourself? I hesitated. Not really. I felt like I had to impress him the whole time. Eason hummed like he'd already known the answer. And with me. I blinked. What? He smirked, leaning in slightly. With me, you're just Colin. No overthinking, no trying too hard. Just you. My heart did a weird little flip. That's different, I muttered. Is it? Eason's voice was softer now. Because to me, that sounds like it means something. I swallowed, suddenly feeling warm. He was close, too close. His familiar scent wrapped around me, and for the first time, I realized just how easy it was to be with him. Eason sighed dramatically, breaking the tension. Well, at least your disaster of a date gave me a night of entertainment. I groaned. Glad to be of service. He chuckled, nudging my knee with his. Don't think about it too much. The right person won't make you feel like you have to try so hard. I looked at him then, really looked at him. And for the first time I wondered, had I been looking in the wrong place all along? The party was Ryan's idea. Apparently, one of his friends from work was throwing a huge birthday bash at a rooftop bar, and somehow we all got invited. At first, I wasn't even planning to go. After the disaster of a date with Zane, the last thing I wanted was to be surrounded by people. But Ryan had insisted, saying I needed to drink my heartbreak away, and that Eason would make sure I didn't do anything stupid. Well, Ryan clearly underestimated my ability to do stupid things even with Eason around. Because I was drunk. Very, very drunk. The kind of drunk where the room tilted every time I blinked and my body felt like it had turned into a noodle. The kind of drunk where I couldn't remember how many shots I'd taken, only that Eason had been there for every single one, shaking his head in amusement. Colin, you're wasted. Eason's voice cut through the hazy blur of noise and flashing lights. I grinned at him, swaying slightly. Am not. I'm celebratin'. Eason raised a skeptical brow. Celebrating what, exactly? That was a good question. I opened my mouth, then shut it. No idea. Ryan, equally wasted but somehow still standing, slung an arm around my shoulder. Celebrating his freedom, obviously. No more dumb crushes. No more disasters. Just good times. Right? Eason rolled his eyes. All right, party's over. You need water and a bed. I have a bed, I announced proudly. Yeah, but you also have terrible aim, Eason muttered as he caught me mid-stumble. He sighed. Come on, let's get you home. By the time we got back to our shared apartment, I was a mess. I barely made it to my room before my stomach rebelled, and I ended up throwing up all over myself. Eason groaned but didn't hesitate. He helped me out of my stained clothes, grumbling the whole time, and shoved a water bottle into my hands. Drink this before you pass out, he ordered, looking half annoyed, half concerned. I pouted. You're bossy, and you're a disaster, he shot back, shoving my damp hair out of my face. I should have cut you off after the third shot. I took a sip. Okay, more like a dramatic gulp, then wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. Eason, you're a good guy. A really good guy. He let out a soft laugh. That's the alcohol talking. No, I mean it. I poked his chest, my finger landing over his heart. You always take care of me. His expression shifted for a split second, something unreadable flashing in his eyes. But then he shook his head. That's what friends do, Colin. Friends. The word sat weirdly in my chest, but before I could figure out why, another wave of nausea hit me. I groaned, leaning against him. Ugh, I hate this. Eason stiffened, then sighed. All right, enough talking. You need sleep. Before I could protest, he maneuvered me into bed. I must have dozed off for a while, but at some point, I woke up again feeling awful. Sweaty, nauseous, and restless. I tossed, turned, groaned, and somehow managed to make Eason's night even worse by getting sick again. I vaguely remembered him cursing under his breath as he cleaned me up, his voice softer than I expected when he told me to stop apologizing. At some point, exhaustion must have caught up with him too, because by the time morning came, I woke up, groggy and disoriented, in my bed. The second thing I noticed was that I wasn't wearing my shirt. The third thing I noticed, Eason, fast asleep next to me, his arm draped casually over my waist like it belonged there. My brain short-circuited. Oh no. I was determined to pretend like nothing happened. Sure, I woke up in my bed with Eason next to me, his arm wrapped around my waist like it belonged there. Sure, I might have stared at his stupidly perfect face for a second too long before reality slapped me awake. But none of that mattered, because nothing happened. At least, that was the lie I told myself as I carefully wriggled out of bed, trying not to wake him. My head was pounding, my mouth tasted like regret, and all I wanted was to erase the past 12 hours from my memory. I tiptoed into the kitchen, praying for coffee and maybe some painkillers. Instead, I walked straight into Ryan and Leo, who were already eating breakfast at the counter. Ryan raised an eyebrow at my disheveled state. Morning, sunshine. How's the hangover? I grunted, heading straight for the coffee machine. Leo smirked. You were a mess last night. Eason really had his hands full with you. I froze. What do you mean? Ryan snorted. Dude, you don't remember? You threw up everywhere, whined about how Eason was the bestest friend ever, and then clung to him like a needy kitten. I groaned, pressing my forehead against the counter. Kill me. Just do it. Leo chuckled. Tempting, but I think Eason might fight us for the honor. As if on cue, Eason strolled into the kitchen, stretching his arms over his head. His eyes landed on me, and a slow smirk curled his lips. Morning, babe. Sleep well. I nearly choked on my coffee. Babe! Ryan and Leo exchanged knowing glances. Oh, this is interesting, Ryan murmured. I shot Eason a glare, but he just leaned against the counter, looking far too pleased with himself. You were very cuddly last night, he said casually. Kept pulling me back every time I tried to move. What was it you mumbled? Something about how I smelled nice. I wanted to die on the spot. Ryan burst out laughing. Oh, this is gold. I groaned, rubbing my temples. I was drunk, okay? None of that counts. Eason hummed. Sure. Whatever helps you sleep at night. Leo, ever the quiet observer, finally spoke up. You know, for someone who's claiming nothing happened, You're making it a big deal. I stiffened. Because there's nothing to make a big deal about. Eason and I are just friends. That's it. Eason's smirk didn't falter. If you say so. For the rest of the day, I avoided him like the plague. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. But I felt him watching me. Every time I walked past the living room, his gaze followed. Every time I grabbed something from the fridge, he was suddenly right there beside me. When I locked myself in my room to get some work done, I caught myself listening for his footsteps outside the door. This was ridiculous. By the time dinner rolled around, I thought I was safe. I'd made it through the day without any more embarrassing encounters. I was in the clear. Then Eason plopped down next to me on the couch. Way too close. A bowl of popcorn in his hands. Movie night, he announced. Leo picked some action flick. You in? I hesitated. Ryan smirked. Oh, now you're scared of sitting next to him? What happened to nothing happened? I scowled. Fine. Whatever. I sat stiffly while the movie played, very aware of the fact that Eason's thigh was pressed against mine. Every time I shifted, so did he, like he was doing it on purpose. I refused to look at him, until, of course, he leaned in and murmured, Relax, Colin. You're acting weird. I turned, ready to snap at him, but my words got caught somewhere between my brain and my mouth. He was close. His usual playful smirk was gone, replaced by something unreadable. My heart stuttered. I tore my gaze away, pretending to focus on the movie. Denial was safe. Denial was easy. But as Eason chuckled softly beside me, like he knew exactly what was going through my head, I had a feeling I wasn't going to be able to stay in denial for much longer. This was a terrible idea. I knew it the moment I agreed to another date with Zane. I knew it when I stood in front of the mirror, trying to convince myself that this was completely normal. I knew it when Ryan raised an eyebrow and said, So, this is what denial looks like. It's not denial, I grumbled, adjusting my shirt for the third time. I'm just proving a point, right? And what point is that? That you're super into a guy you've barely texted since your first date. Ryan crossed his arms, looking entirely too smug. Or that you're totally not in love with Eason? I nearly dropped my phone. Excuse me? Ryan just smirked. Nothing. Have fun on your little date. I ignored him, grabbed my jacket, and left before he could say anything else. But his words clung to me the entire way to the restaurant. By the time I arrived, Zane was already waiting at a table near the window, flashing me his usual easy smile. Hey, stranger. Thought you forgot about me. I forced a chuckle. Nah, just been busy. Busy avoiding my texts? He teased. Oof, this was off to a great start. I scrambled for a response, but before I could say anything, a voice cut through the air like a knife. Wow, fancy seeing you here. My stomach dropped. I turned, already knowing what I'd find. Eason, standing there like he owned the place, hands in his pockets, head tilted with that signature smirk of his. He was wearing a leather jacket over a plain white tee, the absolute worst combination because it made him look obnoxiously good. What are you doing here? I blurted out, trying, and failing, not to panic. Eason shrugged, strolling over like he belonged at our table. Oh, just grabbing a bite. Didn't expect to see you here. Zane looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. Hey, you're Colin's friend, right? Eason grinned. Best friend, roommate, lifelong supporter, emotional rock. You name it. I groaned. Eason, mind if I join? He asked, not waiting for an answer before sliding into the booth right next to me, effectively trapping me between him and the wall. Zane blinked. Sure. I clenched my fists under the table. Eason, what are you doing? He leaned in slightly, voice dropping just enough for only me to hear. Making sure you don't do something stupid. My eye twitched. Like what? Like pretend you actually want to be here. I was going to kill him. Right here. In this restaurant. Zane cleared his throat. So, how do you guys know each other? Eason's arm stretched across the back of the booth. Behind me. Oh, Colin and I go way back. We're practically attached at the hip. Right, babe? I choked on my own spit. Excuse me? Zane's eyebrows shot up. Babe. Eason grinned. Slip of the tongue. Must be a habit from all the late nights together. I whipped my head toward him. We do not have late nights together. Eason tapped his chin. Really? 'Cause last night you sure seemed. I stomped on his foot under the table. He winced but kept his smug expression intact. Zane let out a small laugh, clearly amused by whatever was happening. You guys have an interesting dynamic. Oh, you have no idea, Eason said smoothly. I could feel my entire soul leaving my body. The rest of dinner was a complete disaster. Every time I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, Eason derailed it with some ridiculous comment. Did Colin ever tell you about the time he cried because I ate the last slice of pizza? Eason. Or how he sleep talks about me. It's adorable, really. Eason. Oh, and then there's the way he. Eason. I swear to God. By the time the check arrived, Zane was laughing, Eason looked way too pleased with himself, and I was questioning every life choice that led me to this moment. As we stepped outside, Zane turned to me with a grin. Hey, tonight was fun. Even with the unexpected company. I sighed. Yeah, sorry about that. He shrugged. No worries. But, you and Eason. Nothing's going on, I said quickly. Zane smirked. Sure. Before I could argue, he patted my shoulder and walked off, leaving me alone with the menace himself. I turned to Eason, ready to lay into him, but he just smirked down at me, completely unfazed. You're welcome, I groaned. For what? Saving you from a boring date. I shoved his shoulder. You are ridiculous. Eason just chuckled, draping an arm around me as we started walking home. Admit it, Colin. You weren't into him. I stayed silent, because as much as I wanted to deny it, he was right. And that was the real problem. The rooftop had always been my favorite place to clear my head. Something about the open sky, the distant hum of the city, and the cool night air made everything feel a little less overwhelming. Tonight, though, it wasn't working, because Eason was here, and he wasn't leaving. You've been avoiding me, he said, leaning against the railing beside me. He wasn't teasing this time. No smug grins, no playful jabs. Just a quiet intensity that made my stomach twist. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. I haven't. Colin. Damn it. The way he said my name made it impossible to lie. I sighed. Fine. Maybe I have. Eason tilted his head, studying me. Why? I kept my gaze fixed on the skyline. I don't know. Bullshit. I clenched my jaw. Can you not? Not what? He pressed. Not ask why my best friend, my roommate, has been acting like I don't exist ever since I crashed his stupid date? My grip on the railing tightened. Because you did crash my date, Eason. You embarrassed me. I swallowed. You made me feel things I wasn't ready to feel. Silence. Then a quiet chuckle. Not mocking, just tired. Colin, he murmured. And when I finally turned to face him, my breath caught, because Eason wasn't smiling. His dark eyes held mine, serious and unguarded in a way I'd never seen before. Do you really not get it? My heart pounded. Get what? He exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. I've been in love with you for months. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I stared at him, convinced I'd misheard. You what? Eason huffed out a laugh, but there was no humor in it. God. I wasn't gonna say anything. I figured you didn't see me that way, and I didn't want to ruin what we have. But you... He shook his head. You drive me insane, Colin. I swallowed hard. Eason. No, let me finish. He took a step closer, and suddenly, all I could hear was my own heartbeat. Do you have any idea how hard it is to watch you chase after guys who don't even see you the way I do? To sit back and pretend I'm fine with just being your friend, when all I want is to be something more. My throat went dry. Eason. He exhaled, softer this time. I wasn't gonna say anything, but then you went on that stupid date. And I saw you with him, and he let out a rough laugh. And I couldn't take it. So yeah, I crashed your date. And yeah, I made an ass of myself. But I don't regret it, because at least now you know. Couldn't breathe. Eason was in love with me. Eason, my best friend. My Eason. And suddenly, every moment we'd ever shared, the teasing, the late-night talks, the way he always knew what I needed before I even said it, came rushing back with painful clarity. Panicked. I need to go, I muttered, stepping back before he could say anything else. Eason's face shifted, like he wanted to stop me, but he didn't. I spent the rest of the night lying awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to force my brain to make sense of it all. But I couldn't because every thought led back to him. Every memory, every feeling I'd buried. It all came flooding back, and it was too much. The next afternoon, I found myself knocking on Leo's door. He raised an eyebrow when he saw me. You look like someone ran over your puppy. I sighed, stepping inside and dropping onto his bed. I need your advice. Leo shut the door and crossed his arms. Okay, hit me. I hesitated. So, I have this friend. Leo's eyes immediately narrowed. Colin. What? I said, feigning innocence. You do not have a friend. You are the friend. I groaned. Fine. Whatever. Just, can you listen? He sighed, sitting at his desk. Go on. I swallowed. So, this friend of mine, right? He's had this best friend for years. They do everything together and it's always been easy. But then, one day his best friend confesses. Says he's been in love with him for months. I clenched my hands together. And now, my friend, he doesn't know what to do. Because suddenly, he's remembering all these little things. And it's terrifying. Leo watched me for a long moment. Then, in typical Leo fashion, he said, Your friend is an idiot. I scowled. Wow. Helpful. He leaned forward. Colin, be honest with yourself. If you felt nothing for Eason, you wouldn't be this torn up about it. You'd have shut him down instantly. But you didn't. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Leo sighed. Look, I get that it's scary. But Eason has always been there for you, hasn't he? Through everything. I nodded slowly. And doesn't it scare you more to imagine a life without him? That hit me like a punch to the gut. Because the answer was yes. Leo gave me a small, knowing smile. Then maybe it's time to stop running and do something about it. I let out a slow breath, my chest feeling just a little lighter. Yeah, I murmured. Maybe it is. The tension had been unbearable. For days, something had shifted between us. Ever since that night under the stars, when Eason had laid his heart bare, my thoughts had been a tangled mess. Every moment with him felt heavier. Every glance lingered a second too long. And every accidental touch sent a jolt through my body that I couldn't ignore. I was losing my grip. And it all came to a head one night when we were alone in the apartment. Ryan and Leo were out, leaving just Eason and me in the quiet space we shared. I had been avoiding him, not overtly, but enough that he noticed. He always noticed. And tonight, he had apparently had enough. You're acting weird. His voice broke the silence, his gaze locking onto mine from across the living room. He was sprawled on the couch, one arm draped over the backrest, looking way too relaxed for the storm brewing inside me. I scoffed. I'm not acting weird. You're avoiding me. No, I'm not. Eason sat up, leaning forward, his eyes never leaving mine. Then why do you flinch every time I get close? Why do you suddenly find the floor so interesting when I look at you? My jaw clenched. I don't. Colin. That was all it took. Just my name, spoken in that low, knowing tone, and my entire body betrayed me. A shiver ran down my spine, my breath catching in my throat. I hated how easily he could unravel me. Hated how much I wanted to let him. He stood up, closing the space between us with slow, deliberate steps. I should have backed away. I should have stopped him. I didn't. Eason stopped just inches away, his warmth radiating into the small gap between us. You're running, he murmured, his voice softer now. Why? I swallowed hard. I'm not. You are. He tilted his head, studying me. Are you scared? I laughed, but it came out shaky. Of you? Please. He smirked. Not of me. Of this. His hand lifted, fingers brushing against my wrist. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it sent a wildfire through my veins. My pulse pounded beneath his fingertips, and I knew he felt it. Knew he could see right through me. I should have pulled away, but instead, I whispered, "You're imagining things." Eason's eyes darkened. Am I? Then he closed the distance. His lips met mine in a slow, devastating kiss, one that shattered every ounce of resistance I had left. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing, just heat and want and years of unspoken tension igniting all at once. I responded before I could think better of it, my hands gripping the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. Eason groaned against my lips, deepening the kiss, his arms wrapping around me like he was afraid I'd slip away. But I wasn't going anywhere. We stumbled backward, barely making it to the couch before we collapsed onto it, a mess of tangled limbs and desperate touches. My mind screamed that this was reckless, that things would never be the same after this. But I didn't care. Not when Eason was kissing me like I was the only thing that had ever mattered. Tell me to stop, he murmured against my lips, his breathing heavy, his forehead resting against mine. If you don't want this, tell me now. I looked into his eyes that had always been there, always watching over me, always waiting. I thought about all the years we'd spent dancing around this, all the moments I had pushed down, buried, ignored. I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I curled my fingers into his shirt, pulling him back down to me. Don't stop. And he didn't. The first thing I noticed was warmth. The second was the steady rise and fall of a chest beneath my cheek. It took my half-asleep brain a few seconds to process, but when I did, my eyes snapped open. Eason's arm was draped over me, his hand resting on my waist like it belonged there. His face was peaceful in sleep, his lips slightly parted, dark lashes fanned against his skin. Oh, right. Last night happened. Heat crept up my neck as memories flooded in. The way he kissed me like he'd been starving for it. The way I pulled him closer instead of pushing him away. The way his hands traced my skin. His whispers against my ear. His weight pressing me into the couch until nothing else existed except us. And now here we were. Again. Only this time everything felt different. I should move. But instead, I let myself linger. Let my fingers rest against the fabric of his t-shirt. Let my heart hammer against my ribs like an idiot who had no idea what came next. Eason stirred, a soft hum escaping his lips. His grip on me tightened slightly before his eyes slowly blinked open. The second he saw me, a slow, lazy smirk spread across his face. Morning, boyfriend. I choked on air. What? No, that's not. He chuckled, his voice still thick with sleep. Relax, just testing it out. I groaned, shoving at his shoulder. You're the worst. And yet you're still in my arms. I scowled but made no move to escape, which only made his smirk widen. After a few moments of silence, he exhaled, voice softer. Are you freaking out? I opened my mouth, ready to deny it, but hesitated. Because honestly, I was. Not because I regretted anything, not even close, but because this was real now. There was no more pretending, no more hiding behind excuses. We weren't just roommates. We weren't just best friends. We were this, and that scared the hell out of me. Eason must have read the panic creeping into my expression because his fingers brushed against my waist, grounding me. Hey, he murmured. You don't have to figure everything out right now. I swallowed hard. But what if I mess this up? His brows furrowed. Colin. He shifted, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look me directly in the eyes. You won't. You don't know that. He huffed, shaking his head. I know you, and I know that whatever happens, we'll deal with it. Together. I stared at him, at the unwavering certainty in his gaze. He'd always been like this. So sure, so steady. Like nothing could shake him. Like I couldn't shake him. Something in my chest loosened. Just a little. Do we tell the others? I asked after a beat. Eason grinned. Ryan's going to say, finally, and Leo's going to pretend he wasn't betting on it. I groaned. Oh my God. Welcome to dating me. I covered my face with my hands. I hate you. His laughter was warm as he pulled my hands away and pressed a kiss to my forehead. No, you don't. And the worst part? He was right. The moment I stepped into the kitchen that morning, I knew I was in trouble. Ryan and Leo were sitting at the table, mugs of coffee in hand, both looking way too smug for my liking. Eason, of course, was already at the counter, casually eating cereal like he hadn't just turned my world upside down last night. Ryan was the first to speak. So, I froze mid-step. So? Leo took a slow sip of his coffee, studying me with a knowing gaze. Anything you want to share? My heart rate skyrocketed. Did they hear something last night? I scrambled to keep my expression neutral. No. Ryan snorted. Right. So you and Eason just happened to be all domesticated this morning for no reason. I glanced at Eason, who looked utterly unfazed as he leaned against the counter, watching the interrogation unfold with an amused smirk. I don't know what you're talking about, I muttered, moving toward the fridge like I had any hope of escaping this conversation. Leo set his mug down with a soft clink. Colin. I winced at his tone. Damn it. Ryan grinned. Look, man, we've all been waiting for you two to figure it out. It was only a matter of time. I turned back around, feeling my face heat up. It's not. Oh my God. Ryan groaned, throwing his head back dramatically. Are you still in denial? After last night. I nearly dropped the milk carton. What do you mean after last night? Ryan waggled his eyebrows. Thin walls, bro. Leo smacked him on the arm. Ignore him, he said, though his lips twitched in amusement. We're happy for you. Both of you. I opened my mouth to argue, to deflect, to do something. But then Eason's arm was suddenly draped over my shoulders, pulling me against his side effortlessly. Yeah, Eason drawled, his voice dripping with satisfaction. He's mine now. You guys can chill. My brain short-circuited. Eason, Ryan cackled. Oh, now you want to admit it? Leo just shook his head with a chuckle. Well, congratulations, I suppose. I groaned, covering my face with my hands. This was not how I imagined this going. Eason, the absolute menace, just leaned in and murmured near my ear. Admit it, Hiddleston. You never wanted anyone else. I stiffened, his words hitting way too close to home. Because, yeah, he was right. He was always right. Slowly, I exhaled, lowering my hands and turning to meet his gaze. His expression was playful, but underneath it was something quieter, something real, something ours. I let out a resigned sigh and muttered, You're ridiculous. Eason grinned. And you're officially taken. Ryan whistled. About damn time. Leo just smiled knowingly, sipping his coffee. And for the first time, I let myself smile too. Living with Eason as my boyfriend instead of just my obnoxious, overconfident roommate was supposed to feel different. More complicated. More something. But the truth? Felt ridiculously easy. Colin, where's my hoodie? Eason's voice echoed from his room. I rolled my eyes from where I was sprawled on the couch. Which one? The black one. You know, my favorite. Oh, you mean my hoodie? I shot back innocently. There was a pause before he appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking. Your hoodie. I lifted the hem of the oversized hoodie I was currently drowning in and gave him a smug look. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Eason stalked forward, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. You know, if you wanted to wear my clothes so badly, you could have just asked. I scoffed. As if I'd ever. Before I could finish, Eason lunged, tackling me onto the couch. I let out an undignified yelp as he pinned me down effortlessly, his weight pressing me into the cushions. You really like testing me, don't you? He murmured, his nose brushing against mine. I swallowed hard, heat rushing to my face. Maybe. Eason chuckled, low and dangerous. Admit it, Hiddleston. You love being mine. My breath hitched. He wasn't wrong. And now that we were us, I didn't have to fight it anymore. Instead of answering, I tangled my fingers in his hair and pulled him down into a kiss. Eason groaned against my lips, his hands tightening on my waist. "You're such a menace." I smirked. "Takes one to know one." He hummed approvingly before kissing me again. Slow and deep, like he had all the time in the world to ruin me. And honestly, I'd let him. Ugh. I knew it. Ryan's exasperated voice snapped me out of my blissful daze. I turned my head just in time to see him dramatically covering his eyes with one hand. Leo standing beside him, looking unimpressed but not surprised. "You guys are disgusting," Ryan continued, peeking through his fingers. "Do you even think about the rest of us? This is a shared living space." Leo sighed. "We already assumed this was happening. We just didn't need to witness it." Eason, still draped half on top of me, lifted his head lazily. "Then knock next time." "This is the living room," Ryan squawked. Eason shrugged. "And?" I smothered my laughter into Eason's shoulder while Ryan groaned into his hands. Leo just shook his head and patted Ryan on the back. "You'll survive." Ryan shot us a glare. "I want a rent discount for this emotional damage." Eason smirked. "Forget about rent. Colin owes me now." Ryan's jaw dropped. "Wait, so what about the bet?" I blinked, realization dawning on me. "Oh, right, the bet." Leo raised an eyebrow. "Technically, Eason did find you a boyfriend." Ryan gasped dramatically. "So he wins." Eason grinned, looking down at me with an infuriatingly smug expression. "Looks like I do." I groaned, covering my face. "I cannot believe this." Ryan pointed at me accusingly. "So you're telling me, after all that, you just ended up with Eason? The guy who's been in love with you since forever?" Leo smirked. "Sounds fair to me." Ryan threw his hands in the air. "This is rigged. I demand a recount." Eason just laughed, pulling me closer. "Too bad, Ryan. Colin's mine now, and I already won the best deal of my life."